Welcome everyone who has joined us today. We have a wonderful webinar for you today with the Maryland REALTORS Advocacy Team, featuring Bill Castelli, our Senior VP for Government Affairs, our Director of Government Affairs, Susan Mitchell, Director of Housing Opportunity and Consumer Affairs, Lisa May, and our Government Affairs Director from Southern Maryland, who's also helping us out with advocacy, Teresa Coons. So thank you for coming today, and please put your questions in the Q&A box down below, and we will start this now by me turning it over to Bill. Bill, please take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here. We are going to, the real purpose of this webinar today is not only to give you a sense of what issues are before the General Assembly that we're looking at and talking about, but also to really focus in on those folks who are going to be participating in our lobby days next week. So we're going to be doing a lobby day in person with about 50 meetings. I'm going to have Teresa kind of walk through both days. And give you a sense of what issues, how you're going to interact with legislators, whether you're meeting with them in person or virtually, give you some background on the issue so that you feel comfortable talking about it, and just some general tips of how to have that conversation with your legislator. What if they ask a question that you don't know? But give you all of that background, and we'll share some documents that will be posted up on Monday on our website. That'll also give you some materials that you can review and some cheat sheets so that you can have them for your virtual and in-person meetings. So why don't I start with Teresa? Teresa's been doing working day and night, literally day and night, putting a lot of these programs together. So thank you, Teresa. You're doing an amazing job. But why don't you give folks an idea of what that day is going to look like Tuesday, but also Thursday, because with our virtual meetings.
Absolutely. So I'm so excited to have the realtors come back to Annapolis. It is a sold out and much anticipated lobby day on Tuesday morning for in-person visits. And there's been a lot of changes in Annapolis since we've been there in person. So it'll be exciting to see new leadership, new committee chairs, and really walk around the buildings and see it again. Our registration will begin at Governor Calvert House, which is on State Circle at 7:30 in the morning. And just to be very clear, we will be there all day, but 7:30 is when you want to check in. A lot of the meetings start between 8 and 8:30. Your schedule will be available to you when you check in. Your Maryland Realtor Government Affairs staff will be there, and your local AEs and local GADs will be your guides to help you get to each of those meetings. There is going to be some new rules, obviously with COVID protocols are in place. So first, bring your ID. You need an ID to get into either the House or the Senate office buildings for your meetings. You also need to be required to wear a face mask at all times in the public buildings. Please be sure to do that. Finally, I would say bring your patients. We are the first in-person event they are having this session in the office buildings, as I understand. We are going to be seeing longer lines than usual at security. Just bring your patients and be kind to everyone around you. You do not need a vaccine card to get into the buildings, but if you have one, always a good idea to bring with you in case a legislator may or may not request that. So as for the meetings, I'm pretty excited. We had over 50 House of Delegate appointments so far on Tuesday and over 20 Senate appointments for in-person meetings. And that is a lot for a 4.5-hour time slot. So please, again, that patience will come in handy at that point too, going from meeting to meeting. There's also the first full floor House session and Senate session together in several weeks at 10 a.m. So be aware that people are going to be moving around the buildings and people are going to be moving in and out. The bells will be going off. If you have a lapse in the schedule you are given, the Governor Calvert House will have a realtor lounge. We'll have Wi-Fi and refreshments. If you have an hour break during that floor session, come back, join your other colleagues, make calls, have a coffee, get warm again. So what we will provide you, we have many leave behind materials as Bill suggested. We have your schedule for the day, legislative priorities for the Maryland Realtors, and district sheets. And I would have called them cliff notes from my history of high school, talking points for you to work with your legislators on what to ask, what to tell them on committee assignments. And the most important, and Lisa will be my Vanna White, we have a really cool giveaway for our realtors coming in person, our Lobby Day scarf. It is, it's a little bit hard to see because of the video background, I think, but it's really neat, blue color. You have deep pockets to put those priorities in there and hand those out to your legislator. And I think we have a couple of those sheets we wanted to bring up and walk you through. And just be patient because it's not me and I don't know how to do technology. Bill, do you want to walk through District Street and how this works? This is District 20, so Montgomery Greater Capital Area. You have all your delegates listed, where they represent in the county, their parties, their contact information, and what committees they're on. The committees really matter. When we're talking about certain bills, let's say climate action bills, we see them going before committees of economic matters and environment and transportation. So these will help you with your talking points when you go in. We'll have those marked. Economic Matters handles a lot of realtor bills, as Bill has put on this district sheet. We also have 2 new chairmen, both from Southern Maryland. So we also know that those leaderships have changed in the House quite a bit. The great note here on Delegate Moon, congratulate him. He was just handed a lot of the Vice Chair of Judiciary. So these are great little notes to know when you see your delegate for the first time in over 2 years. It's going to be a great day. And I think we have a couple emphases on the bills on below. So we ask which bills we're looking for support on because they have the votes on the committee. As you all know, committee centric is how this works in Annapolis. Most of these bills are voted on and amended and taken care of in the committee before they get to the floor. And that's where we do a lot of our work here on behalf of you, the realtor.
Yeah, in fact, that's a great point, Teresa. So when you're meeting with your legislators, the key thing that they're going to be interested in is what issues are going to be before my committee. Mm-hmm. And we do have some committees before both the House and Senate that really don't have any key issues. So with those committees, we have some talking points, different points that you can emphasize when a bill gets to the floor. You know, we hope some of these priorities move out of the other committees. And so the ask in some of those committees like budget and tax or appropriations would be, you know, should these bills get to the floor, we hope that you can support them when they're on the floor. The other thing we want to make clear too is when we're talking about this, is also introducing yourself and letting them know what the market's doing. You know, let them know how your year has been in real estate, what it's been like. We know how crazy it's been for many people, and I think that's an easy way to kind of open up the conversation with them before you jump right into the issues.
Absolutely. And I think they always really appreciate understanding how their market is so they can then go talk to other colleagues and explain that as well. Is there any question about the in-person portion of this year's hybrid lobby day that you would like? Please throw it in the question and answer portion of the webinar. And if you couldn't be there in person on Tuesday, do not worry. We have over 30 appointments set up for Wednesday on our virtual lobby day. We have appointments all day long for some association members, sorry, but they all want to meet with you, which is fantastic. We've had a great response this year, and we're really looking forward to seeing our delegates and senators. I see one question. You will get your scheduling at the day when you register on Tuesday morning at Governor Calvert House. I will tell you, I'm still getting calls and changes left and right. So we don't want to provide information that's not correct. So we will give those out on Tuesday morning as a final information for scheduling.
All right, great. Thank you, Teresa. I was thinking we would jump right into some of the issues now, and I'm going to share a screen. This document isn't complete yet, so you'll see the completed one on our mdrealtor.org website under Legislative Affairs. So just go to Government Affairs, and it will be there on that page for you to download. Now, what this sheet is going to have is a quick synopsis of some of the issues. And it's not just going to be our key issues. We're also going to be talking about climate change. There are a bunch of landlord tenant bills. I've seen a couple of questions on the Q&A about landlord tenant. We'll talk a little bit about all of those bills. There are about 5,000 of them. Not really 5,000, but it feels like that. And then a bunch of other issues too. So this will be there in case any of these, in case you get a question from a legislator. And the really key point is your job when you're meeting with a legislator is really to tell them the why this issue is important. I know a lot of folks want to get into the details of what the bill does, and you'll get some legislators who will ask, very specific questions about what the bill does. If they ask a question about how it works, what it does, and you're not able to answer it, just note it, relay that back to us so that we can follow up with a legislator, but let them know that one of the Maryland Realtor lobbyists is going to touch base with them and answer any questions for them. But so I wouldn't worry that much about feeling like you got to know every detail of every bill, but putting a face on it. So when we're talking about love letters or pay at the table or deposit legislation, if you can illustrate, why that might have been a problem or why you think this will help, I think giving them the why of why these bills are there is going to make all the difference in the world for them. And Teresa, I saw that we had a question about where we should park too. Do you want to jump in real quick on that?
Yep, and I was just messaging Susan and Lisa. I believe the answer is the Navy Stadium. We're going to have shuttles going to the Governor Calver House. There are also several parking garages off of that main area if you'd like to park closer and walk to the Governor Calver House. We have, I believe there's valet parking at the Governor Calver House that will fill up quickly is my guess, because a lot of delegates do stay there and use that as well.
All right. So let's run through some of the issues. What are the issues before the General Assembly? There's a lot of real estate bills this year. There's over 1,200 House bills that have been introduced so far. We're up to about almost 1,000 Senate bills. Not all of them are real estate, thank goodness. But there are a significant number. We've reviewed about 150 bills with the legislative committee, and I would say we've got another quarter to a third left in terms of the bills that we're going to review. And a shout out to the legislative committee. If you're not on the legislative committee, your fellow realtors who serve on that committee work very, very hard for you. They are the group that reviews all of these bills every week, every Monday, in some very long meetings, and talk about these bills, what positions we should take, and what is the best way to position ourselves to have an impact on these bills as they get introduced. So thank you to all of you legislative committee members on the webinar today too. So with that, let's jump into some of the issues here. I'll take the first one on deposit legislation. This was a bill that had been introduced last year. We did not like the bill, and it became a work group last year, and we were able to work on the bill over the summer with Delegate Chanel Branch to create a bill that we think works. And what the bill is intended to do is to get to instances where a buyer offers a deposit, but then the buyer exercises a contingency in the contract. It may be because the property doesn't appraise for their mortgage, for what they were able to get in terms of financing, or there might be some other contingency that they exercise. So although the bill doesn't permit it for like financing contingencies, almost every other contingency, the bill would allow the buyer to get that deposit back if they're exercising that contingency right away. Many of you know that these deposits can be a really difficult matter between buyers and sellers. Sellers sometimes don't agree to the release of the deposit monies. And the way this bill would treat it is that it's automatically released to the buyer. If the seller feels that the buyer took advantage of the process in some way, they would still be able to go to court the way that a buyer would have to go to court now in order to get that deposit money. But they would, show what their damages are, et cetera, in terms of doing it. So it kind of flips the process on its head. It's very similar to the way Pennsylvania does it. Just make sure that the buyer has that money to move on into another transaction with, because a lot of times that kind of cash deposit money is really important for a buyer to move forward. Love letters. So Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm certain that all of you are very familiar with the concept of love letters. It's that communication from a buyer to a seller saying, please, pretty please pick me over all of the other offers that we know that you have received. And this practice has drawn a lot of attention in the last year or two because of the potential to violate fair housing laws, and also to increase your liability as an agent in assisting in those potential violations. So NAR Legal has recommended against you as an agent facilitating a love letter from your buyer to the seller. And last fall, the Maryland Realtors updated the buyer and seller residential brokerage agreements to also reflect that agents should not be transmitting these communications. So now we are going one step further to really formalize this for all real estate licensees in the state and say that, buyer, if you want to contact a seller on your own outside of the transaction, we can't stop you, but we, the real estate agent, will not be a party to this practice, which really does have the ability to violate fair housing by mentioning protected classes at the federal, state, or local levels. And for those of you who want more information on this, I really do have to recommend our Get Real Estate podcast that we had on the topic of love letters. Bill Castelli, Kathleen D'Artez, and Chuck Caskey really dive into this issue pretty deeply. I learned a lot. I'm sure that you will as well. But that is the bill that we all will be working on this session.
And Bill, before you go on, we do have a question on earned money deposit. If I can share that with you and have you answer it. Wouldn't this new legislation affect the wording in the current contract, as it can contradict it?
So the bill would impact that current language. So basically what will happen is this bill will take effect in October if it passes. And then the contract committee will have to meet to make sure that the contract, meets whatever requirements are in the law. And this is a typical thing that the contract committee does. So the legislative session will end in April. We will know by the end of May what bills are signed into law by the governor or not. And at that point, the contract committee will take a look at any of those new legal requirements that would affect the contract. They will make those changes so that they'll be ready by October 1st, which is the typical enacting effective date of most of the laws.
Awesome. Hey, Lisa, we also have a question for you on love letter legislation. We see a question from Blair, one of our local GADs who's new to the team. Will this still be dropped even though today is a House bill intro date?
Yeah, great question. So yes, this bill was actually filed, I believe, about a week ago now. It's just going through the printing and bill number assignment process. We had another 95 pages of House bills be printed today. So yes, this will come out. Like I said, we're just waiting to see exactly what that bill number is so that we can then share it with all of you.
And keep your questions coming. We're going to answer them as they relate to what we're discussing, and we'll get to the rest at the end of the webinar.
All right, pay at the table. That's a Susan issue.
Yes, it is. Hello, everyone. And I'm Susan Mitchell. I'm the Director of Government Affairs. I also covered the Real Estate Commission, which was keeping us hopping very much last year, as you all know, during our virtual environment. Our key win and takeaway is that we are allowed to continue with virtual continuing education, which has been wonderful for our members, for everybody, given the pandemic. one of the rules with the virtual CE, oh, I'm sorry, I went out of order as far as the pay at the table. So I started with CE. I'll go back. The pay at the table for all of you who aren't familiar, it's been common practice for 30 years now where real estate agents have been paid at the table at the time of settlement. The Real Estate Commission last year decided, based on guidance, that this was no longer permissible. Their interpretation felt no, they had to be paid specifically directly by the broker. Given that guidance, Maryland Realtors is introducing this legislation with Delegate Carey as the sponsor, HB 568, and Senator Riley, SB 425. We're hopeful that this just clarifies a standard industry practice that we've had ongoing for 30 years now, and hopefully the interpretation will be what it's been in the past. This is a new bill. So then going back to the Real Estate Commission and continuing ed and ID affidavit, we have HB 807. Basically, with the continuing education, as you all know, if you take classes that are, they refer to them as canned asynchronous learning, that you can take at any time, you can submit an affidavit that you're you and taking your class. Well, given our new virtual environment, we're able to process a few members for virtual CE, but when we get large classes, like let's say one of our local association, GCAR, has like a Realtor Fest, and you have 200 folks trying to sign up for this class, it's very difficult to administratively get everybody in and offer these learning environments. We believe this bill will streamline the process. You'll be able to present, instead of a photo ID, an affidavit. Both DC and Virginia permit this now. We're hopeful that the commission will do this. We were hopeful to do this through Comar Code. Unfortunately, we just felt maybe the new bill will help clarify it.
All right, condo insurance. I will do this bill. This is a bill that had been introduced last year. There was a lot of confusion over it in the in the Environment and Transportation Committee. So the bill didn't move forward last year. The bill probably preceded the passage of a local law, which was a cottage home law that Queen Anne's County had passed. And it's really because of that local law passing that this bill was introduced. So what does the bill do? It changes how condo insurance works with single family detached condominiums. And I know a lot of you are thinking, a single family detached condominium, that sounds like an HOA. And that's typically how you'll see those single family detached properties. So this is a standalone home, typically organized under an HOA regime. But there are certainly instances where you have condominiums that are also single family detached, freestanding buildings. They're not attached to one another like a typical condo or townhome is. So one of the ways that local governments have approached these kind of cottage cluster laws is sometimes they will have very small homes that are standalone homes on very small lots organized under a condominium regime rather than under an HOA regime. So when that happens, there are a couple of weird things and a couple of difficulties for home buyers. So if you're looking for a home, you see this very affordable workforce type housing, a small home on a small lot, looks like every other single family detached house that you've been looking at, and yet the condo fees are so high, and you're wondering, why are the condo fees so high on this one? Why are the association fees so high? And it's because those condo insurance that drives that fee has to cover all the common elements. And in a typical condo regime, that insurance is covering the floors, the ceilings, the walls. And in a typical condo development, that makes sense because these are all attached units, not detached units. So what this bill would do is separate it out so that consumers know what they're dealing with. So when they're looking at a single family detached property, whether it's organized under a condominium regime or under an HOA regime, they're comparing apples to apples. It's the same insurance requirements. The association fees are going to be based on basically the same things. And this, we think, will help with consumers in terms of comparing one like property to another like property. And it also helps with the law. You know, most of these cottage home laws and cottage cluster laws are intended to be affordable housing. And so when you're forcing these association fees to be so much higher than an HOA, it kind of defeats the purpose. So we think it makes sense, and we're hopeful that this bill will move in the Environment and Transportation Committee this year. Accessory dwelling units, Lisa, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. We will start with accessory dwelling units. And usually the first question we get on this is, what's an accessory dwelling unit? So to break that down in a non-planner vocabulary, we're talking small independent living units that are on the same lot as a primary residence. So that could be your granny flat, your garage apartment, your backyard cottage, your basement apartment. And it's really kind of an older idea of housing. For those of you who like a little pop culture reference, you'll remember that the Fonz, before he jumped the shark, lived above the Cunningham's garage. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. But this old idea is becoming new again because we have, as we have mentioned, an 82,000 unit housing shortage in Maryland, and we have lots of places that are running out of raw land to develop. There just isn't any space for new housing in certain counties. So accessory dwelling units are a way to add capacity without full redevelopment of areas. And they also help those groups of people who are having the hardest time finding housing right now. Seniors who are looking to downside or perhaps need live-in care, recent college grads or young professionals that have a whole lot of credit card debt or student loan debt, and need a place that's lower cost to stay as they build their savings, establish their careers. And then also our lower income workforce in high cost areas. All of those groups can be helped by accessory dwelling units. So these bills, you'll notice the bill numbers here, direct local governments to enact zoning changes that facilitate homeowners being able to add accessory dwelling units. Now, this is an ambitious bill, full disclosure, a very, very ambitious bill because local governments typically do not like being told what they should and should not do by the state, particularly when it comes to planning and zoning issues, which they consider their purview. So this may take a while to get through. We're going to need a lot of education on this, but broad coalitions are forming on this issue. You have AARP, who is really, really out in front on this, has drafted a model nationwide ordinance for people to use. You have the American Enterprise Institute saying that this is a free market, pro-private property rights measure to add housing. So it's something that we're going to work on starting this year, but you may be hearing about this from us for maybe a session or two to come.
Hey, Lisa, we actually have a question to expand on the education piece in our chat. So is an ADU, does it have to be attached to the main house, or can a tiny house work as well?
Yes, so really under model ordinance language, all of those qualify. But what we're seeing right now with local zoning ordinances, some counties don't allow them at all. Some counties only require them to be within the main housing unit. They don't allow detached ones. Some counties only allow detached units if the property can be subdivided. So there are a lot of ins and outs and little quirks as you move jurisdiction to jurisdiction in Maryland. And what we are hoping to get to, and what we have seen in states where they have more uniform policies, is that it almost becomes like the solar industry, where you have companies that will come in, take care of building this accessory dwelling unit from top to bottom. All you need is the space for it. And so you can get those economies of scale that make it really easy for the homeowner and bring down costs, which is a win-win. So that's why we would like to see this approach followed in Maryland.
And there is one follow-up. Does it have to be a relative, or can you rent it out?
So under this, you would be allowed to rent it out, at least one of the two dwellings. So if you were a senior, you could move into the accessory dwelling unit if you wanted to and rent your main house. That could work. But we do see rental restrictions pop up because, places want to see these used as housing, maybe not as short-term rentals, or there are concerns that you get two sets of renters in one property. Maybe it becomes more of a frat house situation or something like that, or has more unintended consequences. So yes, we could see, an owner occupancy requirement in one of the two dwellings.
And Lisa, I think you covered it great. It's going to be a whole new issue for our local planning as well as county, municipality, and state. And I know the last question was asking what type of housing, but it's going to depend where you live in your jurisdiction.
Right. This bill would say that you cannot place, really unreasonable restrictions on these. Yes, you may be able to put some restrictions that, it's not on a steep slope or in a floodplain or things like that, but you couldn't require huge setbacks for accessory dwelling units if you don't also require them for, say, a shed or a detached garage, something like that. Also, you have to consider about development fees that local governments may want to charge on these, like school impact fees or things of that nature. We try to limit those because, again, that takes something that should be an affordable housing option and makes it less so.
Thank you. And why don't you discuss the partition of heirs bill too?
Absolutely. So the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. This is another model ordinance that is being adopted in quite a few states, particularly in the South and in the Midwest. So what is that? This is a situation where a property or a family farm has been held for generations, but passed down outside of a will or a formal estate plan. So when that happens, all of the heirs hold the property as tenants in common. And when that happens, when you are holding a property with 4, 5, maybe 10 or more tenants in common, is you have a real estate speculator or developer that approaches one of the more distant heirs and says, hey, I will buy out your interest in this property. And that person, maybe they need the money, maybe they're not attached to the property or have ever set foot on it at all. And they think, well, that sounds really great. I can sell my interest in this property and get some money for it. Well, after that speculator has bought the small fractional interest, they can go to court. They can force a partition sale, which means all of the other tenants in common have to sell that property, usually at a court auction and usually far below what the market rate of that property is. So instead of having their wealth stay within their family, having that equity to build upon, it's stripped from them and it goes to that speculator. And under current law, that process, it is completely legal to do so. So what these bills seek to do is to put some guardrails around the process. It gives notice to the other heirs, the other tenants in common, that someone has requested a partition sale. It requires that a market rate appraisal be conducted on the property so that everyone knows exactly the equity and the money that they're dealing with. And then if a sale does need to occur, it gives the other heirs a right of first refusal to purchase that property and keep it within their family. So a lot of states, I believe we are up to 19 now that have enacted some form of this law, and another 7, including Maryland, are considering it. But it has received widespread bipartisan support because practices like this do contribute to the wealth gap and the Black homeownership gap, and some of the disparities that we really see in our housing market and in our economy.
Great. We're going to just touch on a couple of the issues too that are going to be in the handout. They're not bills per se this year. Wholesaling is an issue. I'm going to have Susan talk a little bit about what the commission is doing on wholesaling. But that's an issue where you have folks who will go out to a property, they will offer a contract on the property, and then they will take that contract and sell it to another person. So that assignment of the contract, and I'm not sure what the history of it is and why it's called wholesaling, but has now been termed wholesaling by a lot of folks within the real estate industry. So that assignment of the contract is then sold to a buyer. And there have been instances where a person who put the initial contract on and is now trying to sell the contract doesn't pass on the same kinds of disclosures. In fact, oftentimes, I shouldn't say oftentimes, but sometimes buyers don't even know they're buying a contract rather than the property itself. And so there's a whole lot of disclosure issues. We've had real estate agents that have been caught up in it because they think they're working with a buyer and the seller, only to find out that it's actually the person assigning a contract. You can imagine that the buyer isn't too happy, the real estate agent doesn't know. And so there've been all kinds of just drama and issues surrounding these. So the Real Estate Commission has taken a look at it. There was some talk about legislation this year, but I think they're going to wait and see what the Real Estate Commission does. Is that right, Susan?
Yeah, actually, the Real Estate Commission does have a task force reviewing this. We have spoken with a couple of delegates about the issue. They were trying to find out more about it. But the commission is, if they do legislation, it would be for the following session. They'd have to do a concept sheet and the administrative way to introduce the bill. But we do know, I believe Illinois has some legislation regarding it, City of Philadelphia, and I believe Texas. So they're looking at it through the lens of consumer protection, given all the reasons you just stated.
There's going to be another issue that's been talked about a lot all across the country, not just in Maryland, is adaptive reuse of commercial spaces. So one of the things we've seen during the pandemic is more people doing virtual work, webinars like this, and work itself virtually. And so there's people reimagining what commercial spaces are going to look like in the future. Do we need as much space as we have currently? And the result of all of this has been, including the big changes that were happening in retail prior to the pandemic, is that you have a lot of commercial space that is underutilized, sometimes vacant, in fact, and it's just sitting there. So there's a lot of people trying to imagine, with all of the kind of undersupply of housing that exists throughout the country. Maryland is rated right now as the state with the 11th highest housing deficit in the country. So we're not quite California and Oregon and those places yet, but we're getting there. And so people are saying, well, we've got all of this underutilized, sometimes vacant and blighted commercial space. Why can't we build density into those areas, residential housing density? So a lot of people taking a look at that issue. There's a work group right now, but with the Department of Housing and Community Development, taking a look at that issue, and they will be making some recommendations over the summer. And we hope to see a bill next year on commercial and adaptive reuse. I will also quickly jump into a couple of other issues. One is on landlord tenant, and these will also be on the sheet, this sheet for you as well on Monday. There have been a lot of different landlord tenant issues, everything from the eviction surcharge. So if you're a landlord, you go to court, you file a case before the court, you pay an eviction surcharge if you're going to try to get a writ of possession in terms of moving forward with your eviction. There's a bill right now that would significantly, two bills actually, that would significantly increase that fee, which is about $8 right now, one to about $60, one to over $70. But for landlords, the really big issue is whether you can recover that fee in court. So if you have a tenant who's been a non-paying tenant, like in almost every other civil action you bring before the court, the judge has the ability to say, okay, you tenant, you didn't pay your bills. Landlord had to go to court in order to evict you out of the property. We're going to award, that cost to the landlord. So that surcharge would be recoverable by the landlord through the security deposit or something like that. So that recoverability of the fee has been a key issue. There are two bills, one introduced by the Attorney General's office that does not allow the recovery of that fee, one introduced by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee that does allow the recovery of the fee. So this is a very controversial issue among landlord groups and among tenant groups, and we'll see what happens. I would say, we feel that it makes a lot of sense to make that fee recoverable. We don't think you should create a separate rule solely for landlords. And, there seems to be this assumption that, that a lot of legislators have in terms of landlords, that we're all these, huge titans of real estate. And in fact, over 40% of rental housing is provided by mom and pops, the small landlords. They might own one or two properties. About 30% of our realtor members in Maryland are engaged in some kind of either management of these small properties or have them as their own investments. And so we're talking about maybe 2 or 3 properties that they're managing. So it is really important for legislators to know that there needs to be balance in landlord tenant law. We recognize that a lot of tenants have been through some really tough financial circumstances over the last year, but guess what? So have a lot of landlords. And so have a lot of small mom and pops who might be paying a mortgage on their rental property and a mortgage on their principal residence. So you're really stuck in between a rock and a hard place if you're a small landlord, and you're not getting your rent payment and you're still making these 2 mortgage payments. In fact, we know that many landlords have had trouble doing that. They've either had to dip into the savings account. We even know of circumstances where landlords have had to file for foreclosure or go through a short sale. So it's just reminding folks that, tenants aren't the only ones who are suffering. We want to make sure that there are good rules out there. The rental assistance programs are great. But people also have to recognize that, if you're a landlord and you're paying a mortgage on a rental property, some of these rental assistance programs have taken months before any of those rent payments have started. And there are just some landlords who are not in a financial place in order to wait months and months and months for that. So rental assistance has been important, but it is not the solution for every circumstance out there. So we're trying to make that case. And so when you're before Environment and Transportation Committee, Judiciary Committee, JPR, just, making the case that, there needs to be a balance within that landlord tenant law. And there are other bills in landlord tenant in terms of fees and when you can file for eviction and when you can't, based on whether you're applying for rental assistance or not. Legislation saying that you have to do mold inspections and bed bugs, and that could go on and on and on. There are a lot of landlord tenant bills this year. And then climate change, we're really saying the same thing on climate change legislation. Maryland already is a leader in state climate change legislation. There's a climate change commission that has been hard at work over the last few years putting together a plan. We've got some aggressive bills that are really focused on the building industry. And although they don't mention kind of standalone single family properties, they do mention most residential, like multi-unit properties, anything of over 25,000 square feet. So if these properties are getting to net zero at a time when we know, based on calculations of what Maryland population is going to be, at a time when Maryland population growth is occurring, that's putting a lot of cost on residential housing. And we just need to be sure that we are designing whatever climate change legislation we have to address these issues in a way that isn't going to make housing unaffordable. And that's really our key point to make on that, on all of those bills that are before the Environment and Transportation Committee, as well as the Education, Health and Environment Committee. All right. How are we on questions, Teresa?
We have one related to earned money deposit. Does it go back to the buyer even if he defaults? And will seller's recourse now be going to court?
So these are only in instances where the buyer exercises the contingency. So let's say HOA documents are not provided to that buyer. Buyer has that right to step out of contract. The buyer would get the money at that point. If the buyer's in default, it would not apply in a situation like that. It would also not apply to all contingencies. So let's say there's a financing contingency on the property. The bill does not specify financing contingencies because there are a whole lot of issues where the buyer a lot of times is often responsible for what that financing looks like. And so we don't include that as one of the contingencies to allow that automatic return either.
This last one is not one that's about one of our priority bills, but it is about I'm trying to figure out the best way to really read it, but debt collection activity and an appeals court opinion requiring property managers to have an attorney to file any court action. Bill, I don't know if that's come across you on landlord tenant.
It has not. So if you go up to mdrealtor.org, you can get our contact information, and please just shoot me that information. I'd be interested in looking at it.
And we do have 61 people participating. No more questions. So if any, we're here still for a few more minutes. We can answer anything.
So I did see, I think, a lobby day question because we were saying we'd be there all day. Someone was trying to figure out the end of day.
I think it was for virtual. And so the virtual is still being prepared. We just shut down registration this morning. So we're putting together those schedules. When we said day and night, I'll be working all weekend. So Super Bowl virtual preparation for everyone. We will get those schedules to you as soon as possible. There's a lot of Zoom links to commandeer and get out to every attendee. And I noticed who it was, and I'll reach out to them directly so she can do her schedule.
Okay. And the end of day on Monday or on Tuesday for lobby day?
We're going to go until about 1 o'clock. Some people have meetings that end earlier. Some have extended a little bit. We're doing it by local. So when you register, you'll be going around with your local primary association and your staff there. So let's say Greater Baltimore, they have many appointments because they have a much larger delegation, and they are going from 8:30 until about 1 p.m. Some of the smaller delegations, we've combined them. So you have people who share a lot of district lines. I know myself and Prince George's from Southern Maryland, we share 2 or 3 delegates and senators. So we'll be splitting some of those appointments up as well. So we will be working as a team.
Yeah, and again, I just want to step in and I want to thank Teresa, Lisa, Susan, who have been putting in the hours on this lobby day. And that's not the only thing they're putting in the hours. I want you guys to know next week we have 25 hearings. We're not we're not offering testimony in all of those bills, but it is an incredibly busy week. We've got one of our priorities bills is up on Tuesday. So we talked about that condo insurance bill. That is going to be up on Tuesday. And that is the bill that is going to allow, a better, more transparent process for people buying those cottage homes. The other thing I would want to mention as well is in terms of Tuesday hearings, we also have a rent control bill. I forgot to mention that on the landlord tenant. So yeah, there is also a rent control bill that would limit certain properties, doesn't affect all rental properties, but it limits certain properties to increasing their rent no more than 2% each year. And one of the key points we try to make with a lot of the rent control ideas is one, I haven't seen a really legitimate study that has showed rent control works because it's all about supply and demand. And the best way to control rents is to have a greater supply of rental housing. And that's the solution to these bills. But I also want, a lot of people don't really understand that, when we look at the 20% increase in home values, that those property values are affecting rental properties. They're not covered by homestead tax credits. They get the full force. When that new assessment comes in, they're paying taxes on all of that. So to limit someone at 2% when their costs are going to greatly exceed that puts them in an unsustainable financial position. And if you want, a greater supply of rental housing, this is not the way to do it. So just keep that in mind too, because that bill will be up in the House on Tuesday.
And guys, before we go, I do just want to mention, obviously it was humorous to hear Bill talk about putting in the hours when he's the one that gets to deal with all these landlord tenant issues. I don't know when he sleeps. But we are going to keep you updated on all of these bills and general themes of the General Assembly session through a couple of vehicles. One, we have our legislative status report on mdrealtor.org, and that is updated in real time. The bills that we are watching, the positions that our state legislative committee has taken on them, when the hearings are coming up. So if you ever are wondering, hey, I wonder what happened to that bill about X, Y, or Z, check out that status report because you will certainly see it there. We also have our weekly View from Annapolis blog that shows some of the key themes for the week in the General Assembly, the issues that your advocacy team is working on. And then finally, I'll highlight our Open Doors website. It's opendoorsmaryland.org. And that outlines our pro-housing agenda that is really aimed at consumer engagement in housing issues. So please be sure to check those out. And of course, you can always contact any or all of us with the questions that you have on legislation.
All right. Well, I want to thank you. There was a question about the rent control bill number. I believe that's HB 551. HB 551. And again, thank you all, and we will see you next week.
And thank you to the wonderful Maryland Realtors Advocacy Team. And we will see you all hopefully on Lobby Day. Have a great day.